First, though, the approval process for two of the nation's largest coal seam gas projects has been described as a farce. This coming from a former senior public servant working on that environmental approval process. With me this morning to discuss, the Green spokesperson, Senator Larissa Waters. Senator, thanks for joining us from Melbourne this morning. First of all, can we just establish the starting point from you and the Greens? Do you accept the industry does have a role to play, particularly when it comes to job creation in regional areas?
Well, on that point of jobs, Kieran, they make these grand claims that there'll be thousands of jobs. Frankly, it never eventuates. It's often orders of magnitude less. And look at the jobs that you're threatening in agriculture and in tourism from all the damage that they do to the reef for ports to export coal seam gas. I don't think it stacks up if you're simply looking at it through a jobs prism. But of course, there's more than just jobs at stake here. There's actually the future of our regional and rural communities. We need that groundwater to farm that land. And in Queensland, where I'm from, we don't have a lot of good quality farmland. So it's crucial that we do everything we can to protect it. And I'm afraid this industry, as we saw on Four Corners last night, has been allowed to barrel ahead without us having that knowledge of the long-term consequences for our land and our water. And that really scares me to the core, and I think it scares a lot of other people too.
I want to get to those reports from Four Corners last night in a moment, but just before we move on to the specifics of those claims, when it comes to the regions, this is a divisive debate, as you know, because there are many in the regional communities who are actually benefiting. It has been the source of a fair bit of wealth creation across a number of major regional centres.
Well, look, I think certainly some people, a small handful I would say, get some benefits. But what you're finding, and this is the case with the mining boom right across the country, if you're in the industry, great, you're getting a good wage. But for everybody else who's trying to live in those towns, suddenly the cost of living has gone through the roof. People can't afford the rents. I've heard stories that you can't get a mechanic anymore in your local car shop because people are off working in the mines or working in the coal seam gas industry. So you actually find that it makes life a lot more difficult and a lot more expensive for folk who aren't lucky enough to have a job in that industry. So I think those claims about universal benefits are frankly a lot of gumph. And it's a handful of folk who benefit and the rest of us pay the costs. And that's just economically. Of course, there's environmental costs as well. So, look, I just don't think this industry stacks up. And when you've got alternatives for energy supply, which we do, particularly in Queensland where we have the world's best sunshine, then let's invest in that first.
Right.
Surely that seems a no-brainer.
On the specifics of these approval environmental processes or lack of processes, the reports suggest, who do you put the accountability down to? There was a suggestion in the ABC report last night that groundwater, for example, was not included as part of the approval process for the big Santos project in Queensland. Who should be held accountable, in your view, for that flaw in the process? And when it comes to the industry generally, what do you believe should happen? Should it be suspended? Should all further projects not go ahead? How far do you want governments to go?
Well, look, clearly we saw that the previous state government in Queensland had heavied its senior bureaucrats to push through approvals, even though there wasn't adequate information about crucial things like groundwater. And of course, nobody's been looking at the climate impacts of coal seam gas. And what we're now seeing with some independent studies finally happening is that actually this stuff leaks like a sieve. And you've got flammable methane leaking at sometimes 3 times the rate of background levels. So significant leaking, which of course is doing untold damage to our atmosphere. So the state government hasn't been looking at this, and the federal government hasn't been looking either. So frankly, I put the blame at both levels of government for simply letting this industry steam on ahead without actually being adequately checked and without its consequences being properly scientifically examined.
And now, in terms of the industry as we move forward, what are the Greens arguing? Are you saying there needs to be an outright suspension, or do you see any positive role for this industry, which is obviously, as you say, expanding quite rapidly along the eastern seaboard?
Look, we need to press pause on this industry until we actually understand what it's doing to our land and our water and our climate and our reef, for that matter, with all of the dredging to export this stuff to overseas markets. I mean, there are so many unanswered questions about this industry, and yet all of the big companies have already got their approvals from both the state government and the federal government. So I'm afraid it's both of the big parties that are complicit in allowing this dangerous industry to steam on ahead. So we've got to press pause until we actually understand what's going on.
Senator Larissa Waters, appreciate your time this morning. Thanks for that.
Thanks, Kieran.